The young princess never expected to become queen. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was born on April 21, 1926, into a world where her uncle David was destined to rule the British Empire. She was third in line to the throne, behind her uncle and her father. Life seemed simple and predictable for the little girl who loved horses and dogs more than royal duties. Her childhood was filled with ordinary moments that would later seem extraordinary. She learned to drive during World War II, not in a fancy car, but in a military truck. At just 18 years old, Princess Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, becoming the first female member of the royal family to serve full-time in the armed forces. She trained as a driver and mechanic, getting her hands dirty with engine oil and learning to change tires. The other young women in her unit had no idea they were working alongside a future queen. Elizabeth insisted on being treated like everyone else. She slept in the same barracks, ate the same food, and followed the same rules. Her fellow servicewomen called her by her number, not her title. She learned to strip down engines, repair vehicles, and drive heavy military trucks through the London streets during blackouts. But fate had different plans for the young princess. In 1936, when Elizabeth was just 10 years old, her uncle King Edward VIII made a decision that would change her life forever. He chose love over duty, abdicating the throne to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. Suddenly, her father Albert became King George VI, and Elizabeth found herself next in line to rule. The weight of this responsibility didn't fully hit her until years later. As a teenager, she watched her father struggle with the enormous pressure of being king during World War II. King George II had never expected to rule. He suffered from a severe stutter and was naturally shy, yet he had to lead a nation through its darkest hour. Elizabeth saw how the crown changed her family's life completely. Their private moments became public property. Every decision was scrutinized by Parliament, the press, and the people. She watched her father age rapidly under the stress, his health deteriorating from the constant pressure of royal duties. Despite knowing what lay ahead, Elizabeth embraced her destiny with remarkable maturity. On her 21st birthday, while visiting South Africa, she made a radio broadcast that would define her reign. Speaking to the Commonwealth, she declared that her whole life, whether long or short, would be devoted to serving the people. These weren't just pretty words for a young woman who had already proven her commitment through military service. The princess began preparing for her future role with dedication that surprised even seasoned courtiers. She studied constitutional history, met with prime ministers, and learned about the complex workings of government. She understood that being queen meant more than wearing a crown and living in palaces. It meant being a symbol of stability and continuity for millions of people across the Commonwealth. Her preparation intensified when her father's health began failing in the early 1950s. King George VI had developed lung cancer, though this was kept secret from the public. Elizabeth began taking on more royal duties, representing her father at official events and state functions. She was essentially serving as queen in all but name. The moment that would change everything came on February 6, 1952. Elizabeth was in Kenya with her husband Philip, staying at the Treetops Hotel, when news arrived that her father had died peacefully in his sleep. At 25 years old, she was now Queen Elizabeth II, ruler of the United Kingdom and head of the Commonwealth. The story goes that she was watching elephants from the hotel's viewing platform when she became queen, though she wouldn't learn of her father's death for several hours. It's a poetic image that captures the unexpected nature of her ascension. One moment she was a young wife enjoying her honeymoon period. The next she was the most powerful woman in the world. Her return to London was somber and swift. The plane that had carried a princess to Kenya brought back a queen. Elizabeth's transformation was immediate and complete. She put aside her personal grief to fulfill her constitutional duties, meeting with Prime Minister Winston Churchill and beginning the process of planning her coronation. What many people don't realize is how much she had to sacrifice personally for the crown. Her naval officer husband Philip had to give up his promising military career to support her reign. Their young children, Charles and Anne, would grow up with a mother whose first duty was always to the nation, not to them. The coronation planning revealed Elizabeth's attention to detail and her understanding of symbolism. She insisted on having the ceremony televised against the advice of many traditionalists. She wanted ordinary people to witness the ancient ritual that would make her their queen. This decision brought the monarchy into the modern age, and allowed millions to feel personally connected to their new sovereign. Months of preparation went into every aspect of the coronation. Elizabeth practiced wearing the heavy St. Edward's crown, which weighs nearly 5 pounds, to build up her neck strength. She rehearsed the complex ceremony repeatedly, understanding that any mistake would be seen by millions of viewers around the world. The young queen also had to navigate the complex relationships between the old guard courtiers and her own vision for a more modern monarchy. Some advisors wanted to maintain strict traditions, while Elizabeth saw the need to adapt to changing times. Her decision to allow television cameras into Westminster Abbey was just the beginning of many reforms she would implement. As Coronation Day approached, the weight of history pressed down on the young woman who had never expected to wear the crown. She was about to take an oath that would bind her for life, promising to serve her people above all else. The carefree princess who had once repaired trucks during the war was about to become one of the most recognizable figures in the world. The transformation from Princess Elizabeth to Queen Elizabeth II represents one of the most dramatic changes in modern royal history. A woman who had been preparing for a supporting role suddenly found herself center stage, carrying the hopes and expectations of an entire empire on her shoulders. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II on June 2, 1953, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. For the first time in history, millions of people could watch a British coronation from their living rooms. Television sets were still expensive luxury items, but neighbors gathered in homes across Britain to witness their new queen take her sacred oath. Inside Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth wore a dress that told the story of the Commonwealth. Norman Hartnell, her designer, had embroidered the gown with the floral emblems of every Commonwealth nation. English roses, Scottish thistles, Welsh leeks, and Irish shamrocks were joined by Canadian maple leaves, Australian wattle, New Zealand fern, and South African protea. The dress weighed 11 pounds and required 8 months to complete. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of ancient tradition. The same words that had been spoken over English monarchs for nearly 1,000 years were repeated, as Elizabeth was anointed with holy oil from the same golden spoon used since the 12th century. The Archbishop of Canterbury placed St. Edward's crown on her head, a moment that symbolically transformed a young woman into the embodiment of centuries of British history. But what television viewers couldn't see was the human drama unfolding behind the pageantry. Elizabeth had been awake since dawn, nervous about the weight of the crown and the complexity of the 3-hour ceremony. She had practiced every movement, every response, but the reality of the moment was overwhelming. The crown was so heavy that she had to learn to move differently, keeping her head perfectly straight to maintain balance. Her coronation dress nearly caused a diplomatic incident that morning. The zipper broke just as she was getting ready to leave for the Abbey. Palace seamstresses worked frantically to repair it while Elizabeth remained calm, showing the composure that would define her reign. She understood that millions were watching, and any sign of panic would undermine confidence in the new monarch. The procession back to Buckingham Palace after the coronation was a carnival of celebration. Despite drizzling rain, 2 million people lined the streets of London. Elizabeth and Philip rode in the Gold State coach, an ornate vehicle that weighs 4 tons and requires 8 horses to pull. The coach has no shock absorbers and is notoriously uncomfortable. But Elizabeth smiled and waved for the entire journey. What many people never learned was how the young queen handled the aftermath of her coronation. The ceremony was exhausting, but her duties had only begun. She spent hours that evening meeting with Commonwealth representatives, each requiring individual attention and protocol. By the time she finally reached her private apartments, she had been in formal dress for over 16 hours. The early years of Elizabeth's reign were marked by a series of tests that would have challenged any leader. The Suez Crisis in 1956 put her in direct conflict with her prime minister, Anthony Eden. The Queen had to navigate between her constitutional duty to support her government and her personal belief that the invasion of Egypt was wrong. She couldn't publicly oppose Eden, but palace insiders knew she disagreed with the military action. This crisis revealed one of the most surprising aspects of Elizabeth's character, her political instincts. Despite having no formal education in international relations, she possessed an intuitive understanding of global politics. She correctly predicted that the Suez invasion would damage Britain's relationship with the United States and diminish the country's influence in the Middle East. Her weekly meetings with Prime Minister Eden became increasingly tense during the crisis. The Queen's constitutional right to be consulted, to encourage and to warn put her in an impossible position. She couldn't override her government's decisions, but she could express her concerns privately. These conversations, documented in government files released decades later, show a young queen already demonstrating remarkable political sophistication. The Suez Crisis also highlighted Elizabeth's role as head of the Commonwealth. Many Commonwealth nations opposed the invasion, putting the Queen in the awkward position of representing countries with conflicting interests. She had to maintain relationships with leaders who were furious with British policy, while supporting her own government's actions publicly. Another early challenge came with the emergence of television as a dominant media force. Elizabeth had to learn how to use this new medium effectively, while maintaining royal dignity. Her first televised Christmas broadcast in 1957 was watched by more people than any previous royal address. She wrote the speech herself, focusing on the importance of family and community values. The preparation for that broadcast revealed Elizabeth's perfectionist nature. She insisted on multiple rehearsals, studying every gesture and expression. She understood that television created a sense of intimacy that radio couldn't match. Viewers would be looking directly into her eyes, judging her sincerity and character. The success of that broadcast established her as a natural television performer. Behind the scenes, Elizabeth was also dealing with family pressures that most people never suspected. Her younger sister, Margaret, was involved in a highly publicized romance with divorced group captain Peter Townsend. As head of the Church of England, Elizabeth couldn't publicly support her sister's desire to marry a divorced man, even though she personally sympathized with Margaret's situation. The Margaret and Townsend affair became a national obsession, with newspapers speculating daily about the Queen's response. Elizabeth found herself trapped between her role as sovereign and her love for her sister. She spent hours in private conversations with Margaret, trying to help her understand the constitutional implications of the romance, while acknowledging the unfairness of the situation. The resolution came when Margaret publicly renounced Townsend in 1955, stating that she had decided not to marry him because of her duty to the Commonwealth. This sacrifice deeply affected Elizabeth, who saw how royal duty could destroy personal happiness. The incident shaped her later approach to family crises, making her more sympathetic to the personal struggles of other royal family members. These early challenges taught Elizabeth valuable lessons about the loneliness of leadership. She learned that being queen meant making decisions that affected millions of people, while having very few confidants who could understand the pressures she faced. Her husband Philip became increasingly important as her closest advisor and emotional support, though their relationship had to adapt to the reality that she, not he, held ultimate authority. The young queen also discovered that her every action was interpreted as a political statement. Her choice of clothing, her facial expressions, even her posture were analyzed by the press and public for hidden meanings. She developed what courtiers called her royal mask, a pleasant, neutral expression that revealed nothing of her personal thoughts or feelings. The third surprising fact about Queen Elizabeth II would truly touch anyone's heart, revealing a side of the monarch that few people ever witnessed. Behind the formal ceremonies and state occasions lived a woman whose greatest joy came from the simplest moments with her beloved animals, particularly her Pembroke Welsh corgis. Elizabeth's love affair with corgis began when she was just 7 years old. Her father, then Duke of York, brought home a corgi named Dookie in 1933. The little princess was immediately enchanted by the dog's playful personality and loyal nature. She spent hours playing with Dookie in the gardens of their London home, finding in this small companion the unconditional love that would sustain her through decades of royal duty. When Elizabeth turned 18, her parents gave her a corgi of her own named Susan. This wasn't just any birthday gift. Susan became Elizabeth's constant companion and the foundation of a breeding program that would span her entire reign. Susan traveled with Elizabeth on her honeymoon in 1947, hidden in the royal carriage to avoid publicity. The princess couldn't imagine starting her married life without her faithful friend beside her. Susan lived for 15 years and produced numerous puppies that became the foundation of Elizabeth's corgi dynasty. Over the course of her reign, the Queen personally owned more than 30 corgis, most descended from Susan. She gave each dog a name that reflected either their personality or significant events in her life. There was Honey, Sugar, Whiskey, Sherry, and even one called Disco, born during the height of the dance craze in the 1970s. What most people never realized was how hands-on Elizabeth was with her dogs. Despite having an army of servants, she personally fed her corgis every evening at 5 o'clock sharp. She mixed their food herself, carefully preparing a menu that included fresh rabbit, beef, chicken, and vegetables. Each dog had specific dietary requirements that the Queen knew by heart. The corgis lived in luxury that surpassed most humans. They had their own room at Buckingham Palace, complete with elevated wicker baskets and blankets embroidered with the royal cipher. But more importantly, they had unlimited access to the Queen herself. They followed her from room to room, slept in her bedroom, and accompanied her to her private study, where she conducted official business. Elizabeth's relationship with her corgis revealed her nurturing side in ways that formal royal duties never could. She knew each dog's personality intimately. Some were mischievous troublemakers who chewed furniture and stole food from state banquets. Others were gentle and well-behaved, serving almost as therapy dogs during stressful periods of her reign. The dogs provided Elizabeth with emotional support during some of the most difficult moments of her life. When her marriage to Philip went through rough patches in the 1950s and 1960s, she found solace in her corgi's unchanging loyalty. When political crises threatened to destabilize the monarchy, she could retreat to her private apartments and find peace in the simple act of brushing their coats or playing fetch in the palace corridors. One particularly touching story involves a corgi named Whiskey, who suffered from severe arthritis in his later years. Elizabeth personally administered his medication twice daily and modified his diet to help with joint pain. When Whiskey could no longer climb stairs, the Queen had a special ramp installed so he could continue following her to the second floor of the palace. She refused suggestions to put the aging dog down, insisting that he deserved to live out his natural life in comfort. The Queen's devotion to her dogs sometimes caused diplomatic complications. During state visits, foreign dignitaries had to navigate around corgis, who considered the palace their territory. The dogs occasionally bit visitors, including a palace guard, and even a member of the royal family. But Elizabeth refused to banish them to the kennels during official events, arguing that they were part of the royal household and belonged wherever she was. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Elizabeth's relationship with her corgis was watching them age and die while she remained dutiful to her royal obligations. She attended countless state funerals for world leaders, but the private grief she felt when losing a beloved dog was often more intense than her public mourning. Palace staff learned to recognize the signs when one of the corgis was failing, and they would quietly adjust the Queen's schedule to give her more time with her dying companion. Elizabeth made the difficult decision to stop breeding corgis in the early 2000s because she didn't want to leave young dogs behind when she died. This decision revealed her deep sense of responsibility even toward her pets. She couldn't bear the thought of her beloved animals being confused or neglected after her death. The last few corgis of her reign became even more precious to her. She spent increasing amounts of time with them as she reduced her public appearances due to age. Palace staff often found her in the gardens at dawn, walking slowly with her remaining dogs, treasuring these quiet moments away from the demands of monarchy. The Queen also rescued several Dorgy crosses, a mix between her corgis and her sister Margaret's Dachshund. These unexpected additions to the royal pack showed Elizabeth's compassionate nature. When Margaret died in 2002, Elizabeth took in her sister's beloved pets rather than send them to strangers, even though it meant managing dogs with very different personalities and needs. Elizabeth's corgis served as a bridge between her public and private lives. They were the only living beings who saw her both as Queen and as simply Elizabeth. They didn't care about her crown or her constitutional duties. They loved her for the belly rubs she gave them, the treats she snuck them during formal dinners, and the gentle voice she used when speaking to them in private. This relationship with her animals revealed the Queen's capacity for unconditional love and her need for relationships free from the complications of protocol and politics. Her corgis never asked her to make difficult decisions about the Commonwealth, never criticized her speeches, and never questioned her judgment. They simply loved her, and she loved them back with a devotion that sustained her through 7 decades of service. The sight of Elizabeth with her corgis became one of the most humanizing images of her reign, showing the world that beneath the crown and formal dress lived a woman who found joy in the same simple pleasures that brought happiness to millions of her subjects. The fourth surprising fact about Queen Elizabeth II involved her secret talent as a mechanic and her lifelong passion for driving, skills that most people never associated with royal dignity. Even into her 90s, Elizabeth remained one of the most skilled and enthusiastic drivers in the royal family, with habits and stories that would surprise anyone who only knew her formal public image. Elizabeth's mechanical abilities originated during World War II when she served in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. Unlike other royals who received honorary positions, she insisted on genuine training. She learned to strip down engines, change spark plugs, repair carburetors, and diagnose mechanical problems by sound alone. Her instructors were amazed by her quick learning and genuine interest in how machines worked. These skills proved surprisingly useful throughout her reign. Elizabeth maintained several vehicles at her private estates, and she often performed minor repairs herself, rather than calling palace mechanics. Staff at Balmoral Castle in Scotland regularly found the Queen under the hood of a Land Rover, oil stains on her clothes, troubleshooting engine problems with the expertise of a professional mechanic. Her driving style was legendary among those who knew her personally. Elizabeth drove fast and fearlessly, treating the winding roads around her Scottish estate like a personal racetrack. She knew every curve, hill, and shortcut within miles of Balmoral, and she used this knowledge to navigate at speeds that terrified her passengers. Security officers dreaded being assigned to ride with the Queen because she refused to slow down for anyone. One famous incident occurred in 1998 when Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia was visiting Balmoral. Saudi law forbade women from driving, and Abdullah was reportedly uncomfortable with the idea of being driven by any woman, even the Queen of England. Elizabeth decided to personally show him around her estate, and she drove her Land Rover at her usual breakneck pace over rough terrain and narrow mountain roads. Palace staff later reported that Abdullah emerged from the vehicle looking shaken and pale, while Elizabeth appeared energized by the adventure. She had made her point about women's capabilities without saying a word about politics or women's rights. The message was clear. In her realm, women could do anything men could do, and often better. Elizabeth's love of driving extended to her choice of vehicles. While she used formal state cars for official occasions, her personal fleet consisted mainly of practical Land Rovers and Range Rovers that could handle rough country roads. She preferred manual transmissions and four-wheel drive, vehicles that required skill and attention rather than luxury and comfort. The Queen never held a traditional driving license because British licenses are issued in her name, making it legally unnecessary for her to license herself. However, she was one of the most experienced drivers in the country, having driven regularly for more than 70 years. She understood road rules better than most licensed drivers, and had never caused a serious accident despite her adventurous driving style. Her mechanical knowledge extended beyond cars to other machinery around her estates. Elizabeth could operate farm equipment, knew how to maintain generators, and understood the workings of the estate's various mechanical systems. This practical knowledge surprised visitors who expected to find a pampered royal with no understanding of real work. The Queen's driving adventures became family legends. Her children and grandchildren all had stories of terrifying rides with Granny, who thought nothing of taking unmarked forest roads at high speed, or crossing streams that seemed too deep for any vehicle. Prince William once joked that riding with his grandmother was more dangerous than his military service in Afghanistan. Elizabeth's relationship with her vehicles went beyond mere transportation. They represented freedom and privacy in a life otherwise governed by protocol and public scrutiny. When she was driving alone or with just family members, she could be herself without worrying about photographers or formal behavior. These moments behind the wheel were among the few times when she could truly relax. Her driving also revealed her independent streak and her refusal to be limited by age or expectations. Even in her 80s, Elizabeth continued to drive herself around her private estates, ignoring suggestions that she should rely on chauffeurs for safety reasons. She understood the mechanics of her vehicles better than many people half her age and trusted her own skills more than anyone else's. The Queen's passion for driving created some amusing situations during state visits. Foreign dignitaries expecting to be chauffeured in a formal limousine were sometimes surprised to find themselves bouncing around in a Land Rover driven by their host monarch. Elizabeth seemed to enjoy these moments of surprise, using them to break down formal barriers and create more natural conversations. Her mechanical skills also proved useful during unexpected situations. Once, when a breakdown left her stranded on a remote part of the Balmoral estate with guests, Elizabeth diagnosed the problem, directed repairs, and had them moving again within an hour. Her guests were amazed to see their queen with grease on her hands, calmly fixing what professional mechanics might have needed hours to repair. The practical aspects of Elizabeth's personality extended to how she maintained her vehicles. She kept detailed maintenance records, knew exactly when each vehicle needed service, and often spotted potential problems before they became serious. This attention to detail reflected the same careful approach she brought to her royal duties. Elizabeth's driving habits also showed her connection to the land and her deep love of the British countryside. She knew every farm road, forest path, and scenic route within miles of her various residences. These drives weren't just about transportation, they were about experiencing the natural beauty of her realm and staying connected to the landscapes that had shaped British history. Her ability to drive well into her 90s demonstrated the physical and mental sharpness that allowed her to perform royal duties for 7 decades. The hand-eye coordination, quick reflexes, and spatial awareness required for skilled driving are the same abilities that helped her navigate the complex challenges of modern monarchy. The image of Queen Elizabeth, too, as a skilled driver and mechanic, challenged stereotypes about both royalty and elderly women. She proved that dignity and practical skills could coexist, and that even the most formal roles didn't require giving up personal interests and abilities. Her love of driving remained one of her most endearing and humanizing qualities, showing a side of the monarch that few people ever expected to exist. These driving adventures created some of the most genuine and joyful moments of Elizabeth's long life, proving that even queens needed the simple pleasure of an open road and the freedom to choose their own direction, at least occasionally. The fifth surprising fact about Queen Elizabeth II revealed her secret sense of humor and her talent for practical jokes that would have shocked the formal world that knew her only through official ceremonies. Behind the serious public image lived a woman who delighted in pranks, witty observations, and moments of unexpected comedy that kept her family and staff constantly on their toes. Elizabeth's mischievous side emerged early in her reign when she discovered that her formal position gave her unique opportunities for harmless but memorable pranks. One of her favorite tricks involved her security detail and her uncanny ability to disappear from official events. She knew every hidden passage, service corridor, and back stairway in Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and her other residences. During state banquets and formal receptions, Elizabeth would sometimes slip away from her security officers by ducking through a concealed door or taking a route that only she knew existed. The panic that ensued when security realized the Queen had vanished was both genuine and temporary. She always reappeared within minutes, usually with a slight smile that suggested she had thoroughly enjoyed the momentary confusion. Her pranks weren't limited to her own staff. When American tourists visited Balmoral Estate, Elizabeth would sometimes encounter them while walking her dogs, dressed in casual country clothes that disguised her identity. Visitors often asked her for directions or information about the area, never realizing they were speaking to the Queen of England. One famous incident involved American tourists who asked Elizabeth if she lived in the area. She replied that she had a house nearby and had been visiting for many years. When they asked if she had ever met the Queen, Elizabeth pointed to her protection officer and said no, but he has. The tourists spent several minutes chatting with the local woman about the best spots to see deer and take photographs, completely unaware of her true identity. Elizabeth's humor often showed itself in her official duties through subtle facial expressions and timing that only those who knew her well could fully appreciate. During long state ceremonies, she developed an arsenal of nearly imperceptible gestures and looks that communicated her thoughts to family members and close staff without breaking royal protocol. Her timing with these expressions was perfect: a slight raised eyebrow during a particularly pompous speech, a quick glance at her watch when ceremonies ran too long, or a barely visible smile when something genuinely amused her. These tiny moments of personality made formal occasions bearable for everyone around. Her who understood her secret language. The Queen's wit was particularly sharp during her weekly meetings with prime ministers. These private conversations, protected by constitutional confidentiality, reportedly included moments of dry humor that surprised even seasoned politicians. Elizabeth had observed political behavior for decades and developed a keen ability to deflate pompous speeches and pretentious attitudes with perfectly timed questions or observations. Former prime ministers later wrote about her ability to ask seemingly innocent questions that revealed the flaws in their arguments or the absurdity of their positions. She never directly criticized or mocked, but her gentle inquiries often forced them to reconsider their approaches. This subtle form of humor served a serious purpose in helping her fulfill her constitutional role of advising and warning her governments. Elizabeth's practical jokes extended to her family relationships, particularly with her grandchildren. She delighted in surprising them during their visits to Balmoral and Windsor. Prince Harry once revealed that his grandmother would sneak up behind him and make sudden loud noises to startle him, then laugh at his surprised reaction. These moments of playfulness created lasting memories that contrasted sharply with her formal public image. The Queen also had a talent for mimicry that few people ever witnessed. She could perfectly imitate the voices and mannerisms of various politicians, foreign dignitaries, and even family members. These private performances, usually delivered to a small audience of trusted staff or family, showed her keen observational skills and her ability to find humor in the serious world of international diplomacy. Her sense of timing extended to public moments as well. During the London 2012 Olympics opening ceremony, Elizabeth surprised the world by appearing in a short film with James Bond actor Daniel Craig. The video showed her apparently parachuting into the stadium with Agent 07, while a stunt double performed the actual jump. Elizabeth's willingness to participate in the comedy sketch revealed a playful side that delighted millions of viewers worldwide. The preparation for that Olympic appearance showed Elizabeth's collaborative humor. She worked with film crews to perfect her timing and delivery, showing genuine enthusiasm for the project. Palace staff reported that she enjoyed the behind-the-scenes process and was particularly amused by the serious way everyone treated what was essentially an elaborate practical joke on a global scale. Elizabeth's humor also appeared in her Christmas broadcasts, though always subtly woven into more serious messages. She had a talent for including gentle observations about modern life that made her seem more relatable to ordinary viewers. Her comments about technology, social media, and changing traditions often contained touches of dry humor that showed she was paying attention to popular culture even in her advanced age. The Queen's practical jokes sometimes involved elaborate setups that required planning and cooperation from her staff. She once arranged for a fake spider to be placed in a location where she knew it would startle a particular courtier who was afraid of spiders. The successful prank required coordination between several staff members and perfect timing on Elizabeth's part. Her love of surprise extended to gift-giving occasions. Rather than simply purchasing expensive items, Elizabeth often chose presents that reflected inside jokes or shared experiences with the recipients. These personalized gifts showed her attention to individual relationships and her ability to find humor in shared memories. The Queen's mischievous nature sometimes appeared during official photographs. While maintaining proper royal composure, she occasionally made small gestures or facial expressions that would only be noticed by people who knew her well. These tiny rebellions against the formality of royal protocol showed her human side without compromising her dignity. Elizabeth's sense of humor served as both entertainment and survival mechanism throughout her long reign. The ability to find amusement in absurd situations, to maintain perspective through difficult times, and to connect with others through shared laughter helped her navigate 7 decades of public service while remaining mentally healthy and emotionally balanced. Her practical jokes and witty observations created countless private moments of joy for those around her, proving that even the most serious responsibilities couldn't completely suppress a naturally playful personality. These glimpses of humor humanized the monarchy and created lasting bonds with family, staff, and even occasional strangers who were lucky enough to witness the real Elizabeth behind the crown. The 6th and final surprising fact about Queen Elizabeth II revealed Perhaps the most touching aspect of her character, her secret acts of personal kindness and the private relationships she maintained with ordinary people throughout her reign. While the public knew her as a formal figure on balconies and in state ceremonies, Elizabeth quietly touched thousands of individual lives through personal gestures that were never publicized or used for royal publicity. These acts of kindness began early in her reign and continued until her final years. Elizabeth made it a practice to personally respond to certain letters from her subjects, particularly those dealing with personal tragedies, military service, or significant life achievements. While most royal correspondence was handled by staff, the Queen personally read many letters and occasionally took pen to paper herself to respond to situations that moved her. One such case involved a young widow whose husband had died in military service. The woman wrote to express her gratitude for the Queen's attendance at a memorial service, not expecting any response. Elizabeth not only wrote back personally, but continued corresponding with the widow for several years, offering comfort during difficult anniversaries and celebrating when the woman eventually remarried and had children. The Queen's personal touch extended to her official visits, where she often made unscheduled stops and spontaneous connections that weren't part of the formal program. During a visit to a children's hospital, she noticed a young patient who was too ill to join the group meeting her in the main ward. Elizabeth quietly asked staff to take her to the child's room for a private visit that lasted much longer than protocol suggested. These impromptu moments became legendary among hospital staff and community workers who witnessed them. Elizabeth had an uncanny ability to identify people who needed extra attention: the shy child standing at the back of a group, the elderly veteran who seemed overwhelmed by the formal occasion, the volunteer worker whose contributions had gone unnoticed by event organizers. Her memory for faces and personal details astounded people who met her repeatedly over the years. Elizabeth would remember not just names but specific conversations, family situations, and personal achievements from previous meetings. A police officer who had protected her during a visit in 1975 was amazed when she immediately recognized him at another event 20 years later and asked about his daughter's nursing career. The Queen maintained several private friendships that existed entirely outside the formal royal circle. These relationships, carefully guarded by both parties, allowed her to experience normal human connections without the complications of protocol or publicity. She corresponded with former staff members long after they left royal service, remembered their birthdays and anniversaries, and sometimes provided private financial assistance during difficult times. Of the most touching examples of Elizabeth's private kindness involved her relationship with the families of servants who worked at the royal residences. She knew the names and circumstances of all the children of her household staff and took genuine interest in their education and career development. Several former palace employees later revealed that the Queen had quietly provided scholarships or recommendations that helped their children attend university or find good jobs. Elizabeth's generosity extended beyond financial assistance to emotional support during family crises. When a longtime palace gardener's wife was diagnosed with cancer, the Queen made sure the family had access to the best medical care and personally checked on the woman's progress throughout her treatment. She attended the gardener's retirement party and his wife's funeral years later, both events that were never reported in the press. The Queen's charitable giving went far beyond the official patronages and public donations that made headlines. She maintained a private fund for emergency assistance to individuals who had served the crown or found themselves in unexpected hardship. Palace staff handled the logistics, but Elizabeth personally approved each case and often increased the suggested amounts when situations seemed particularly desperate. Her knowledge of individual circumstances among her staff was remarkable. She knew which employees were supporting elderly parents, which ones had children with special needs, and which families were struggling financially despite their palace wages. This information never came from formal reports but from her genuine interest in the people around her and her ability to notice details that others might miss. Elizabeth's kindness also showed itself in small gestures that meant enormous amounts to the recipients. She would arrange for flowers from the palace gardens to be sent to staff members recovering from surgery. She remembered to ask about grandchildren's school performances and wedding preparations. These tiny acknowledgments, of their personal lives made employees feel valued as individuals. Rather than just servants, the Queen's private relationships extended to her interactions with world leaders and foreign dignitaries. While their public meetings were formal and protocol-driven, Elizabeth often found ways to make personal connections that transcended political differences. She maintained correspondence with several former presidents and prime ministers long after they left office, relationships that were built on mutual respect rather than diplomatic necessity. One remarkable example involved her relationship with Nelson Mandela, which began as a formal diplomatic connection but evolved into genuine mutual admiration and affection. Elizabeth broke protocol during Mandela's state visit to the UK by personally serving him tea, a gesture that acknowledged his moral authority and her respect for his character. Their friendship continued through private letters and conversations that had nothing to do with official state business. The Queen's ability to find common ground with people from vastly different backgrounds was perhaps her greatest diplomatic skill. She could discuss farming with agricultural ministers, military strategy with defense officials, and child welfare with social workers, always finding ways to make conversations personal and meaningful rather than merely ceremonial. Elizabeth's private kindness extended to animals beyond her famous corgis. She quietly supported animal welfare organizations and personally intervened in cases of animal cruelty that came to her attention. The grounds of her various residences served as informal wildlife sanctuaries where injured birds and animals were cared for under her personal direction. Her concern for the environment and wildlife conservation was deeply personal rather than just politically correct. Elizabeth genuinely loved the natural world and used her private resources to protect habitats and species that might otherwise have been lost to development. These conservation efforts rarely received publicity because she preferred action over recognition. The most touching aspect of Elizabeth's private kindness was her treatment of people who were grieving or facing terminal illness. She had an intuitive understanding of human suffering that allowed her to provide comfort without being patronizing or intrusive. Her letters to bereaved families often included personal reflections on loss and hope that went far beyond formal condolences. Former palace chaplains revealed that Elizabeth often prayed privately for individuals she had met who were facing difficulties. These prayers weren't just general blessings, but specific requests for healing, comfort, or strength for people whose stories had touched her heart. Her faith wasn't just ceremonial, but deeply personal and action-oriented. The Queen's final years revealed the accumulated impact of decades of private kindness. Hundreds of people whose lives she had touched in small ways mourned her death as if they had lost a personal friend, rather than just a distant monarch. The stories that emerged after her passing painted a picture of a woman whose greatest legacy wasn't the formal ceremonies or state occasions, but the individual human connections she had made throughout her extraordinary life. Elizabeth's secret acts of kindness proved that true nobility comes not from titles or ceremonies, but from the daily choice to treat every person with dignity, compassion, and genuine care. Her private legacy of personal kindness may have been her greatest achievement, touching more lives than any crown or throne ever could.